Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Why It Matters. I'm Tracy Kronzak, Director of Innovation here at Now It Matters.
I'm Tim Lockey, CEO here at Now It Matters. We are really excited about the guest that we have today, Christine Priester, who I've known for almost 3 years now. And Christine's story is something that we have been looking forward for months to be able to record for all of you. And so really excited. Christine, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going. Usually we have our guests introduce themselves, and you're welcome to. But I do want to say just a few words. Would not be surprised if Tracy does as well. And what I want to say is that there are some people that you go through life where who they are is unforgettable, and and there and you are one of those people for me, because you became family to me and Jenny while you worked at Now It Matters, and I miss you being here, even though I'm really excited about the way that your career has progressed. And so I am really excited about having you here. So thank you for joining us, and thanks for being that kind of person. So
thank you, Tim. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm not going to add anything. I kind of want to jump into this. What I will say is I really have had the pleasure of working in association with you for the entirety of my time at Now It Matters until you left and moved on to, I hope, more fertile ground. But at the same time, one of the things that I have always appreciated about working with you and being friends with you has been that notion that there's a lot of bullshit that we can cut through really quickly with some pure honesty about who we are and what we're doing. And I think you have always brought that to your work. And it is unbelievably admirable to me to simply be a participant along that journey.
Thank you, Tracy. And it's great to be here. I'm very excited. Thank you for having me. So I'm just going to dive in and introduce myself. My name is Christine Priester. Excuse me. I currently work as a consultant for a company called Heller Consulting. We focus on providing CRM solutions to nonprofit organizations. Yeah, so I started off as an executive assistant, and as I learned more about Salesforce, I was very intrigued. I've always been interested in technology. In 2009, I initially was going to school for computer science, so it's just coincidence. 10 years later, here I am at an IT company, which was great. But Now It Matters was definitely a huge icebreaker for me. Personally and professionally. Being a victim of trafficking, I was able to show up as my authentic self. Everybody was aware of my past, and I didn't have to walk in the door with any shame. So yeah, I started off as an executive assistant, and then I excelled to, I was promoted to be an engagement consultant, where I was able to manage several accounts at one time. I did that for about a year, and then I became a system administrator for about 9 months. And then I transitioned to Heller. One thing I really wanted to talk about was my journey as a Black woman who faced many barriers in life overall, while I was at Now It Matters, and just how companies can really support women like me that have faced the barriers that I faced. During my time at Now It Matters, I consider everybody family. The way that I was treated, everybody was so helpful, everybody was so loving, everybody was so kind. And they were so motivated. You all were so motivated to teach me and to empower me and make sure that I was successful. And that really meant a lot to me. And it really helped, you know, coming from my background and living in or dealing with the amount of shame that I was dealing with while I was working at this company. You know, when I first came in, I was intimidated. You know, this was like a big deal for me to have this position. And just, I'm really grateful for the amount of support that I received during that time. And it was really important for me because I felt like I was a part of something for once in my life. And I felt like I was accepted. And I didn't have to worry about, you know, what people thought of me or, you know, whether my past defined me or not. I knew my past didn't define me, but working at this company really validated that for me. And I felt accepted.
I remember when I think it was after you had been at Now It Matters for almost like 6 months to a year, was when I realized like, oh, um, there's sometimes there's intimidation from you, because what I saw over and over again was you joining meetings and immediately increasing the interest, fun, and quality of the meetings. And so it was such a shock to me to find out that there was any kind of that intimidation um, when you first started. And I want to say there's a lot of power in the authenticity that you would bring to conversations, to accounts, to your perspectives when we would have times that we would do team building. Like you were so present and willing to talk. I just didn't know for a long time. And so yeah, I'm surprised by that. I think I'm mostly surprised I didn't know until later. But what can I ask? What do you feel like that sense at the beginning of who am I, and that sense of belonging? How did Now It Matters foster that, and make sure that was part of what you experienced while you were here?
Well, most importantly, Now It Matters talked about, I mean, working there, we talked about being authentic and how important it was. And, you know, we had team building sessions around how we could be ourselves. And just overall, being your authentic self is challenging. But Now It Matters provided a space for me to be my authentic self and to be accepted, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, again, everybody was just so genuine. And, you know, I can tell that everybody really cared about me, not just as a colleague, but as a person. And it was genuine. And for me, I've never had that in my life. Like, I've never had that space where I was surrounded with people that were truly genuine and truly cared about me as a person, if that makes sense.
It didn't at the time. I feel like as I've gotten to know you more, it does now make more sense. But I remember when you would say that early on, when you were like, I haven't experienced this before. I didn't understand what this was until I got to know you better. You know, um, and so yeah, I feel like that is. I think that was not just me. That was also Joni and Angela and Jenny and Justin. That were around and part of that as well. But I also want to be really clear. I think that your willingness to engage and have that conversation and share what you were experiencing was really transformational for Now It Matters in understanding, oh, this is actually a part that we can play in this. And, I mean, you and I have had conversations even since then about, not everything was really easy at Now It Matters. And there was some really helpful feedback that you gave me about being there, which I would be fine with you sharing. I don't want to share what's yours, but I think some of that would be helpful because Now It Matters does really try, but I don't think that we are perfect.
Well, you always say that, Tim, that, you're not perfect, but you were definitely perfect for me. As a Black woman, I felt very loved and accepted at Now It Matters, and it meant a lot. And just the fact that you were willing to accept that I was able to come to you and you were willing to accept that feedback, like that meant a lot. I feel like I had a voice, and my entire life, that was my problem. I never had a voice. I never had anybody to listen to me or to take me serious, or if I had concerns, and that's why it's so important to me. Like working at the company, my experience, like Now It Matters had such an impact on me because like this was the first time in my life where I had a voice. And it's crazy because these are people that I don't even know, and this is a job, but it wasn't just a job. It was like, it became a family. And again, going back to me being a Black woman, that's what I love about being in this ecosystem is, it's a community. And not every company is like that, but you are. And you provided me with a space where I could be empowered and turn my pain into power. Like, I never thought I would be working in IT after everything I went through. I never thought that I would be engagement consultant or a Salesforce administrator, but you paved the path for me. And every step of the way, everybody was there to support me.
I
feel like I'm getting a lot of
follow-ups.
credit for work that I think the you here is collective. Like Now It Matters as a leadership team. Like that's not all me. That's really Angela, Joni, Rachel, Tracy. So, but you can't imagine how glad I am to hear that was your experience, Christine. Even though I've heard it before, I am really glad that was your experience. Tracy, sorry to cut you off.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think, based on that, I have two follow-ups directly for you, Christine. I think one is, and we were just talking about this in the previous episode with Makita about that value of connection and community and what it facilitates for a person and the types of communication it enables that aren't direct communication that happen during the everyday span of the workday, right? And when we talk about community, I think there is this thing. I'm not personally a memes person. I'm not like all over the social media. I mean, for the morass of pop culture knowledge that I carry in my head, like I use LinkedIn and I occasionally look at somebody's pretty graphic there. But there was a discussion recently that led with a meme about real leaders first lead with connection and then competence. And if you try to do it in reverse, what happens is the need to drive competence will actually intimidate the living hell out of the people that you're actually trying to include in your leadership in the first place. And what I'm hearing you say, Christine, is that was true to your experience, and that was you needed a place to have a communal experience so that you had a minute to not be so worried about like, is like my hair perfectly okay? And am I okay? Am I showing up right? And so forth, so that you could just relax and breathe for a second.
Exactly. And not focus on my flaws.
Yeah, exactly. And then the second follow-up is I think there is a lot of abstract discussion in our world, particularly the world of IT, and particularly the world of businesses that work and operate in IT, that is kind of very like, oh, I don't know what this means about DEI. I don't know how to facilitate equity. I don't know how to facilitate community. And all of these experiences by all of these people are just very uncomfortable for me to learn about. And what is unique about your story is that there are a lot of assumptions baked into what happened to you as a person, that I think two things happen. Either people make immediate judgment about you, or second, people make immediate judgment about what you're capable of becoming. And I want to know a little bit more what that looks like from your lens, not these sort of giant abstractions that we talk about needing in aggregate across our industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's really important, because a lot of people do have assumptions. And for me, just basically, you know, I'm really here to share my story. I'm here to share my story because I want to be myself. I want to help other people, more importantly. And I think that a big barrier to me sharing my story is what people think. What are people going to think, and what assumptions are they going to make? I think that a lot of people have conceptions, and for me, it's scary because you don't want people to look at you as incompetent, because you're being vulnerable and you're sharing things that they don't really understand. So I hope that answers your question or the follow-up, but that's what that looks like for me, is just having fear. There's always a fear of being my authentic self because of how people are going to interpret my barriers and how they're going to view me.
That is answering my question, because what I hear you saying is your reaction to who and what I have lived through is your reaction to who and what I have lived through. And if you need to process that elsewhere, please by all means do. And I will be a resource in helping you understand that journey. But that has no bearing on my competence. That has no bearing on my ability to execute for you. And I think for a lot of people, those things get really conflated together very quickly.
Exactly. And going back to my experience, just to elaborate on that a little more, I feel like I'm a walking testament that those barriers that I face do not determine whether or not I'm competent. As of today, what I'm doing at Heller, I'm working as a consultant. Over the past 2 years, I have grown substantially, and over the past 2 years, I've had an incredible amount of promotion and growth. And none of that had to do with what I've been through. Or what I've been through did not impact what I was able to accomplish. If anything, I was able to turn my pain into power. Like working at Heller, even working at Now It Matters, like I never let my barriers get in the way of my growth. I took off. I didn't know what Salesforce was when I started off as assistant, but as soon as I found out, I took off with it and I ran, and I didn't let anything stop me, anything that I've been through. And, that's again, I'm so grateful for them because I believed in myself, but Now It Matters believed in me too. And you didn't have to, especially after hearing my story, but you did.
Well, I also want to say, now it matters to join the team. There's a 2-week tryout, and that we don't just let people onto the Now It Matters team. And so I think it's really important to note here, yeah, you earned your spot on the team, and that's because you are competent, and we did see you every day show up and take on the next thing. And I found out later, I didn't know at the time that you had come from, and just looking back at it now, this is 2.5 years ago, you were homeless and you started working for Now It Matters. You were in that amount of time, you have by the time this airs, you will have graduated with a bachelor's in sociology. You will have been promoted 4 different times in 2 different companies, received your Salesforce admin certification. It is really important to note, you're already a very gifted person, and I think that is really yours to own. You've done such a great job of moving so far so quickly, and a lot of us have been honored to watch that. And your past has, by my observation, it has affected you. It has made things even harder, and you've actually just pushed through that. And I think that it's right that you've turned your pain into power, but that pain continues to sometimes get in the way. And I think that is okay. And I think that that's important to note. And I know that because recently you put something on Facebook about your past, not Facebook, sorry, LinkedIn, that was incredibly vulnerable. And I'd love to pivot and have you talk about what you put on there, about your history in trafficking and what that looked like.
Yes, and I would love to talk about that today. Thank you, Tim. So I am a trafficking survivor, and a lot of people wonder, what does that mean, and how did you get into that? What happened? Well, I wasn't kidnapped. Basically, I grew up with, my father was incarcerated. My mom had a substance abuse issue. So there was a little neglect going on when I was a teenager. And
Where did you grow up? Sorry.
Oh yeah, I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by the way.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I ended up meeting this guy, this older guy, that just, in the beginning acted as a boyfriend. And what he was doing during this time was basically identifying my vulnerabilities as a teenage girl. Father's out of the picture, mom suffering from substance abuse. This girl's looking for love, right? She's probably missing love at the end of the day. And
So you were 17. How old was he?
26.
Okay.
Yep. And so keep in mind, it's a manipulation thing. This is what a trafficker does. This is what a trafficker looks like, is an older guy preying on younger girls because we're vulnerable. Our brains are still developing. We're easy to manipulate and control because, we're young and we're, what is it called? Naive and things like that. But it started off as like a boyfriend relationship, and basically, things were okay. I think it was like a normal, healthy relationship. And then it turned into verbal abuse and physical abuse. And it's like they do everything to lift you up, and then to get you under their control, they do everything to bring you down. They tell you you're nothing. You're never going to be anything. And they tell you this constantly. And, they manipulate you. They gaslight you. And this goes on for a certain amount of time. And then they convince you to do things for them for money. And that's how a lot of girls and a lot of women get involved in the life. And it doesn't just happen to girls, it happens to women. It happens to men. It happens to people that are vulnerable, that are walking in shame and looking for love. And, it happens right in your backyard. And so that's how I got into that lifestyle. And that's how I became a victim, which I don't consider myself a victim today. I'm a survivor. Just to make that clear, there's a difference. But that's how I got
What
involved.
is that different? Can you speak to that for just a second?
Yeah. So a victim, to me, a victim can still be victimized. A victim is somebody that is still powerless. A victim is someone that, is still mentally stuck in that manipulation. Like for years, it took me years to realize that my trafficker didn't love me, because I was a victim. But now that I'm a survivor, I realize that wasn't love. Like when somebody loves you, they would never treat you the way that they did. And more importantly, you take your power back and you set boundaries and you're able to walk away from those people and cut them out of your life, because as a victim, that takes a lot to do. You've been conditioned since you were a child. It's hard to walk away from this person. And more importantly, a survivor is somebody that is no longer ashamed and can walk in the room and say, yeah, I survived this and look who I am today. My past, a survivor understands that their past doesn't define them and that pain is nothing more but power. So that's the difference. That's a great question, by the way. Took me a long time to realize that, to figure it out, but I am a survivor, a proud survivor. But yeah, so I was in that life for until my early 20s, and he ended up getting incarcerated. And so that's how we got kind of separated. And I ended up going to treatment, and I was finally kind of free. I went to programs. I completed programs at nonprofits. This is where my passion for nonprofits comes in, because when I was transitioning out of the life, if it wasn't for nonprofit organizations, like I don't know what kind of other resources would have been available. And I was a single mom and 2 kids. So I was working with food banks. I was working with organizations that help women of domestic violence, women that suffer from mental health. And that's when I really established my passion for nonprofits and realized like the importance, because I was a client at one point. I was on the client side. And I understand like the importance of having nonprofit organizations in society to help people. Without them, I don't know where I would be today. But my nonprofit background, so it's funny, one of the nonprofits, I started working there. I was so motivated to have an opportunity to overcome what I overcame. I graduated the program, and there was something in me where I wouldn't feel right if I didn't give back. And it just so happened that they had an internship for receptionists at this nonprofit that I was a client at. So I completed the internship, and then I did well, and I got promoted to a donations coordinator. And that's how I got my nonprofit background. And it was the most rewarding thing that I've ever done, is to be able to be on the other side and give back to the women that face the same barriers that I faced. And then here I am a few years later, working for this amazing technology, Salesforce consulting firm that focuses on nonprofits. And I'm like, so you mean to tell me I can like help all of these nonprofits at one time maximize their mission through technology. And honestly, that's why I took off. And that's why I didn't want to be an assistant. I wanted to be, front line as engagement consultant. I wanted to be in the back end doing the configuration. And now I'm doing user stories at Heller and participating in assessments and advising them on which CRM to use. And it's exciting. And these are organizations, that I've seen myself. It's just a beautiful thing because I've seen myself on the other side when I was a client. Like we work with food banks, we work with multiple organizations that help children. My children have been involved with nonprofits to receive resources. And so it's just, that's why I'm so passionate about doing the work that I do today. And that's why I'm so grateful for Now It Matters, because I wouldn't have had this opportunity,
Christine, there's, just knowing who you are and hearing about someone taking advantage of you like that, and hearing how far you've come is just kind of mind blowing. Even though I've known you for a long time, but there are parts of the story that I'm just finding out today. And maybe I can just speak to that. I knew that you were a trafficking survivor, and thanks for the adjustment on vocab there. But I've always been really curious about what that meant, but I've always felt like I can't talk about that, or and honestly, as an employer, maybe that wasn't right. But when you started to work at Heller, I still was like still very curious, but so hesitant about asking the questions about that. And so, when you and I talked about doing this, one of the things I appreciated about you wanting to tell your story is just saying, like, ask the questions and let's have that conversation. So that's kind of a big lead up, because some of what I'm going to ask you still feels really uncomfortable. But I think it's important to ask. And Tracy, I know from your background and experience, you know more about this than I do. So one of the
So I'm
things
just
that
gonna grab a bag of popcorn and watch you struggle a
right, I
bit. Is
know
that
exactly you are.
Yeah.
You're just gonna be like, watch him just dig a hole. I really have always thought that, like, trafficking means you're like kidnapped and thrown in a van and a bag over your head, and you have no contact with your family and all of that. And so it's part of what's blowing my mind here is that is the power of that mind control. And I don't know what the right word for it is, but like you were in contact with your family, I'm assuming, during this time, but they didn't know what was happening, or I'm assuming they didn't know what was happening to you. How is that possible? How does that, like, it just doesn't make sense to me in some ways.
Absolutely. And you know what, Tim, I appreciate you for having the courage to have this uncomfortable conversation and to ask these questions, because this is what survivors need, is for people, that don't understand to understand and to ask these questions. It's really important. So thank you. And as far as like my family knew, I like to compare this situation to somebody that's suffering from substance abuse issues. If you're familiar with that, you can't help, like, think of it like you have somebody, like the trafficker becomes like the drug. This person is hooked on this other individual. So my family was aware, and oftentimes the family are aware, but it's like trying to get an addict to go to treatment when they're not ready. And so your family can do everything in their power to try to get you away. But if you're not ready to leave, it's no different than a woman that's been involved in a domestic violence relationship. You can't force her to leave. And so that's how that happens. And that's a big issue is that's how intense like the manipulation is and the manipulation could be.
I have
Before
a follow-up on that, Christine. Like, so one of the distinctions that I have always been aware of, to Tim's point, there is this explicit manipulation of another human being for the benefit of someone else via verbal, physical, or other forms of abuse and manipulation, and for lack of a better word, psychological kind of torture. And that does differentiate, Tim, from I think the scenario that you've described, and that is like, I'm just abducted somewhere, which also happens in this world. But one thing about trafficking, and for that matter, Christine, you touched on this a little bit too, about the nature of abuse and manipulation in general, is that it is much more prevalent and much more right in front of our faces than I think many of us imagine it to be. So my question really is, I kind of know the answer to this in my mind, but I want to hear your words on this more than anything. If you're an employer, if you are someone who is working with people, what are the cues that employers need to understand from two lenses? What are the cues that an employer might need to know that this person may be experiencing this live and in real time? And what are the cues that an employer needs to know about to support someone who has exited one of those circumstances that might indicate that that employer is not doing as good a job supporting that employee as they could?
Those are great questions. So honestly, as far as like an employer being able to identify if somebody currently working for them is currently a victim, most traffickers won't allow their victims to work at a normal job. They solely put them in the streets or in strip clubs. Now, there are cases where that could happen, or they could be on the verge of they could be what's called conditioned, and the verge of being conditioned. Things to look for are just, like maybe a change in behavior, new boyfriends, just maybe, I don't know. That's actually a really good question, because I haven't really heard of that scenario. Like most women that are being trafficked live don't have normal jobs, if that makes sense.
It does. I just want to get as much of this out as possible, because I think, towards the second question, there's a lot that we could do if we knew what it is that could engenders.
Mhm.
Right. And that is, so you have an employee who, like yourself, has literally come out of the other end of this tunnel as a survivor. What makes your experience as an employee different, and how are mechanisms constructed to better support you?
So, the biggest thing that supported me, the best way I felt supported being a survivor and while I was working at Now It Matters is, again, just having that space where I could talk about it. I didn't have to have any shame. Like, I remember Joni, I was so ashamed. I was ashamed. I wasn't ashamed because of the company or anything anybody did. I was just ashamed because that's how I was when I first started working at Now It Matters. I was still in the process of going through therapy. I never told anybody my story. Everybody's like, don't ever tell your employer what you've been through. People actually will tell you that. And then I had a talk with Joni Bryan, and she's just like, we're just doing our one-on-one meeting. And she just busts out and plays this video of her doing a talk I think it was at a Salesforce event. And she had everybody in tears, and she's talking about, how the barriers she had faced and the importance of being vulnerable and being authentic. And then she just stopped and she's like, what do you think about that?
That's very Joni, by the way.
That is so Joni.
And she always took pride in telling people Christine's a survivor of trafficking. And when I seen everybody's response at Now It Matters, and they're like, "Go, wow, like, Christine, you're such an amazing person. Like, we don't care about that. I mean, we're not, it's not that we don't care, but we're not, there's no judgment, And that made me realize, it's crazy because it made me realize that everything that my trafficker ever told me was wrong. That my trafficker would tell me I could never work a normal job. Nobody would ever accept me. And that's what, companies don't think about because they don't know. Yeah. But just having that space that invalidated what I was taught meant a lot. And, Now It Matters, you all are so big on mental health stuff and just really supporting your staff 100, providing those safe spaces where I could come and talk. And I remember going to Joni. I remember being able to go to Angela and say, I'm feeling, this is how I feel today. I'm just feeling bad. My past is bothering me. And just having that safe space where you're not just treated like an employee, you're treated like a human being.
It's so hard for me to hear, Christine, that someone would intentionally want you to believe so many lies about yourself. And I think it's hard for me because I do know how amazing you are, and so yeah, it's just really. You said that I know that your trafficker became incarcerated. At what point did you know you were being trafficked? This is the dumbest question, but did you know you were being trafficked?
That's not a dumb question. It took me a long time. I went back and forth. It wasn't until he got incarcerated that I thought about it, because I went to a program that specialized in working with trafficking victims. And they had like an intensive 6-week program where they have to uncondition you and they have to teach you that you were a victim, if that makes sense. And if I hadn't went through that program, I'd probably be still saying that, no, I wasn't a victim. I wasn't victimized. You know what I mean?
How did you explain what was happening to you in when it was happening?
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, no, my question is how, when it was happening, what did you think was happening? Like how did you explain
I thought this was my boyfriend and this was what I was. This was my life. This is what I was meant to do and meant to be, because that's what he told me.
I think there's two really interesting and powerful things here, Christine. If I could pick apart a couple of things. One is, this is a scenario that is different than someone who voluntarily chooses sex work as a profession. And I think why that's important, having known a number of women who have been current and former sex workers in my own world, what I think you're doing very powerfully and really, Christine, is calling out that this was a process of longitudinal manipulation and longitudinal sort of erosion of who you were. This wasn't you saying, I voluntarily choose to do anything. And why I think that is so important to call out is your second statement, and that is, I needed a place to be where I could freely say something like, my past has caught up with me today. That statement is not something that many of us who have gone through years or decades of work in the IT industry always feel empowered to say, even if it's true. And that just hit me really hard in the heart. And I need you to know that, because there have been many days in my corporate career and even trying to just do my own thing where my own past have caught up with me, and I've been able to say nothing about that, either because of my own fear or because there was no context like what you're talking about.
Because you didn't have the space.
Didn't have the space, didn't have an employer that was so focused on that, didn't have the right friends or the right mechanisms. And what I want to ask you actually is, for somebody who is looking at this or listening to this and they're wondering, how do I create that space? What is your suggestion in terms of saying, what are the actions that a company or an employer or a leader or a manager can do that creates that space that allows you to say, hey, man, my past caught up with me today, and I just need to stop for a minute and feel truly empowered in doing so?
Well, my suggestion is, for one, allow and encourage all of your staff to always be their authentic self and to be vulnerable. One thing that now matters that is it doesn't just relate to me being a trafficking, it's just about building connection and feeling accepted. Like, as a Black woman, you know, feeling accepted and heard and understood when things were going on, like the George Floyd situation. I felt like I wasn't alone in that when I came to work. So just knowing, supporting your employees from diverse backgrounds, you know, and just letting them know that you hear them, you see them. Like, even though, like, you guys didn't have to acknowledge what was going on, but you did. And that meant a lot to me. And that made me feel safe. And that made me feel like I had a space to come to whoever I needed to come to and say, you know, I'm bothered today. Does that make sense? Another thing is, Heller, currently working at Heller, they have they're very supportive on DEI. They took a lot of initiatives to support DEI, and I'm not as open there because I feel like I kind of overcame a lot of stuff. Like, I don't need to keep talking about it, you know, but I feel comfortable. Like, I feel like I have a voice. If I needed to do that, I can. I have that safe space. It's just what I'm trying to say is what companies and employers can do is build a connection, let your employees know that they're heard, and B, like, just talk about stuff and provide a space to have a conversation about things that are hard to talk about. Like, Tim, you always say, you know, this conversation's uncomfortable, but you're willing to take that initiative, and you don't understand, like, well, you probably do, but it makes everybody else comfortable.
Yeah,
Like, when you're asking me questions, when you're asking me questions about, you know, my experience as a trafficking victim, that makes me feel like you genuinely care.
Yeah, I think I had a moment, and I think your wow, like 19 thoughts and 20 emotions hit me all at the same time, and so like it's gonna take me a second to unpick some of that, and I can't remember the sequencing on it. But what I'll say is, regardless of the sequence, your willingness to talk about this, and I was there for the 3 times I saw Joni give that talk live, saw grown men cry. Maybe I was one of them, whatever, and just uh, saw so many staff be willing to say the truth about their lives that a couple of weeks ago or months ago, I just put out a Why It Matters that included my story of attempting suicide and being in a religious community that I found really harmful. Um, and I think maybe part of what I'm trying to say is that these the ability to share, and this is what Joni always says, right? Like when I share my story, I find out that other people have that story too. And I don't have Joni's story exactly, but I've got parts of it, and I have pain in my story, not anything like yours or Joni's, and that's not what's important. What I do have that last year or earlier this year became really clear to me is as CEO, I have the ability to create the space for that or not. And that I don't think many CEOs know that if they don't if they don't create the space for their staff to have their pasts catch up with them, their staff can't be free to have their past catch up. That there is actually work that needs to happen at the top about saying things like, hey, depression's kicking my ass today, I'm checking out. And that's easy for me to do because I'm not worried about losing my job. And it's
Exactly.
still hard for me to do. And I'm not worried about losing my job. How much harder is it for staff to say, to tell the truth about those circumstances as well? Um, and I think it's important for you to know that your bravery on telling your story um, and being a survivor is actually really, really, I think you may not know how much it impacts people that don't have a similar story, but do have pain in their lives that they can identify with, that it gives them the bravery to tell their stories as well. So um, I really mean thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Exactly. And that's really I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful to have been a part of Now It Matters. It changed my life drastically, in a good way. I'm really grateful to be a part of Heller, life change speaking as a survivor of trafficking. You know, it's just so important to feel supported by these companies. And I'm just really grateful. I'm just really grateful. Like basically, you and Heller have invalidated everything that I've been taught for the past 10 years by giving me a space to be great, to be who I am, and to be greatness. And I'm just really grateful to have this opportunity to talk about this, because this is a hard conversation. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, but it needs to be talked about and it needs to be heard. And so I just want to say thank you as well. A little nervous today. This is my first podcast, but I'm really grateful. And
Is this the first time you're like telling your story, kind of more on a more public, in a more public
yeah,
way?
yep.
Yeah. I think
I'm so impressed. Thank you.
the thing that is true that I hear in your words, and this is, going to be part of our January 2022 podcasts, right? So, the thing that connects with everything that we've been talking about, particularly this month, is put the work in. Like, put the work in. And that's what I'm hearing come out of what you're saying. And that is because, look, you as an employee worked for two different companies who were willing to put the work in. And because they were, and they were willing to have comfortable and uncomfortable, and frankly, sometimes humiliating and shameful realizations about who they were and why they were acting the way they were, and then change, your life changed. Your entire world changed. And I think that's a huge lesson to take out of this as employers, is that, Christine, I've worked with you on countless projects in the past year. And I was like, I'll be candid and say my attitude was always, I'm not worried about this. Christine's on it. Like, she'll get back to me when she's done, and then it'll be just done. Because my experience working with you was with someone who was extraordinarily competent. And then you would just come back and be like, okay, I've got questions about A, B, and C, and D, E, and F. And like, so why would I, as a human being, ever, be denied working with someone of your caliber because the company I work for wasn't willing to put in the work, and that's a huge lesson for us all in this story. And that is, this is the outcome we want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate your kind words, by the way.
I miss you.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm in the middle of a mental health crisis right now. And it's things like this that keep me going, keep me alive, keep me well. So I just want to say thank you. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about. We can do another one.
Yeah, no, I actually want to say a little bit about that, Christine.
Yeah, I do too, please.
Which is that part of what emerged on in what you talked about on LinkedIn, Joni also put a Kickstarter out for you, not Kickstarter, sorry, GoFundMe, because some of your past catching up with you has put you in a mental health space where you need to take care of yourself. And I want to say, first of all, like, Heller is an amazing company. I really, really appreciate what Keith, Jeffrey, and Smita have done.
And Maya, don't forget Maya.
And Maya,
yeah. Mad love for Heller
others,
here.
Right, yeah. And years of commitment around that. In creating a space in which their employees are actually so well cared for. And I think that that's a real testament to them. And part of that showed up when you felt comfortable saying, "This is what I need." I know some of that because you contacted me in the process on that, and I felt so comfortable saying, like, they're going to understand. You just need to let them know. The other reason I'm bringing that up is that to listeners out there, there is a GoFundMe, and we're going to put it in the show notes. And there's a moment here where not all of your treatment has been covered, and I would love to have listeners go and pay back what they're hearing from you on this story, and donate to your GoFundMe. And so we'll put that in the show notes. And I would like to give you a chance to talk for a couple minutes about what that has been like for you, and where you are now, and how things are going.
Yeah, so I mean, being a trafficking survivor, I suffered a lot of trauma, and I'm still working through that trauma today. And as a result, I'm currently in a outpatient treatment program for my mental health. And, at first I was really ashamed and I'm like, oh, nobody can find out. And now I'm just like, you know, it happens. It is what it is. It's okay. And I do want to say thank you, Tim, for always being vulnerable about your mental health, because that encouraged me to share my story and really gave me a lot of courage to talk about it today. I think that's much needed. I wish more CEOs would step up and do things like that. And I do want to thank Keller as well, because they've been very supportive throughout this process. But yeah, that's where I'm at with my mental health. And I'm getting better. And I'm just grateful to have the support system that I do. Really grateful for, again, this opportunity, because this helps me with my mental health. This is like a processing group. So thank you for that. And anybody that is suffering from mental health, please get help. Don't be ashamed. Especially Black women in our community. Mental health is not talked about enough. It's overlooked. Please reach out for help if you need it.
I know I can already tell that people that are listening to this are going to want to know if you're okay with them reaching out to you on LinkedIn or
Yep.
whatever, and help and asking where to find some of those resources.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Please reach out if you just need someone to talk to you. I am in the process of trying to start a mentorship group for women that have faced any barriers. Just women in general, but especially if you faced any barriers, homelessness, trafficking survivors, suffer from mental health, substance abuse. I definitely want to start providing mentorship to help you, guide you through the ecosystem.
And it is, by the way, I will point out for our listeners, there is a world of care out there that, I can only speak to from my frame of reference, and this is not my conversation. So I will only briefly say, I had a very unbelievably violent childhood and early adulthood, and there is a system of care structures out there that when a person like myself is feeling trapped in my past, feels very hard to access and very hard to understand. And even if I do know how to access it and understand it, sometimes the literal barriers are the fact that most insurance companies don't cover the kinds of things truly necessary to recover appropriately from violence and from trauma. And those kinds of treatments are not cheap. They are frequently piecemeal, and they are often done, as a last resort when they should really be done first and foremost. And I think that's a whole nother thing to dive into as an employer when it comes to equity of care. And that is, what does our healthcare provide for, and where are these kinds of gaps? And I guarantee you, if you do some digging into it, you will find gaps in these areas.
Yep.
So just a note for our listeners who are employers, this is one reason why that GoFundMe exists, is because these kinds of things do not come as part of ordinary employee care.
Christine, by the time and thank you for that, Tracy, that I think it's really easy for CEOs and C-suite decision makers around things like, what plans do we cover, and those have high cost implications. It's really easy to forget how real world those decisions end up being. Like, it's just very easy to forget that. And not everybody has a Jenny Lockey on staff with them that reads every line of every
Jenny.
plan to make sure that we're optimizing like that,
Yep.
And so I also, Christine, we didn't really talk about it that much, but your graduate, like the things that you have done in the last few years, like you're graduating in a matter of weeks now. And if I remember correctly, you have a class load right now of like 5 classes. As a
Dropped one.
good job. I'm so
But
glad to hear
it's not needed.
Yeah.
I did drop one. Yeah, I'm
Good.
taking 4 classes and I am graduating with honors with a major in sociology.
Single mom.
Yeah, you're one of those weird
it's just
January
like-
diplomas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got one of those too. Yep.
So what's the graduation date? I think it's mid-December. What's the
December 10th
December
is the
10th?
ceremony. Yep.
And last day of classes, when do you turn your last work in?
I believe December 3rd. Is that next week?
It's so close.
At the time of
Uh-oh.
recording, it's
so
next week.
close.
Everybody's going to
Yeah.
be listening to this in January
Yeah.
2022. But
Right.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Don't remind me. I have a lot of work to do. Finals always makes, but yeah, no, remind me. I'm graduating. You're right.
You
Yeah.
are graduating.
it's a
and,
done deal by now. There.
Yeah.
It's just so incredible. And I also feel like, I'm sure you know this, but in case you don't, like, you are particularly gifted. You are like that. What you're doing here is, I don't think it's normal for someone to come this far in this amount of time. And I know I'm very proud of the team here and Now It Matters and what we've accomplished in creating a space for you to grow. Same thing with Heller. But that doesn't mean it's been easy for you, and it doesn't mean that anybody except you has done the work. So we're really excited, really impressed, and I'm so grateful to be a friend of yours, and so excited to see what your future holds. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for sharing your story and being willing to do that about being a survivor.
Thank you for giving me the platform to do so. I appreciate it. Thanks for your kind words.
I'm Tim Lockey.
I'm Tracy Kronzak, and you've been listening to Why It Matters.
Why It Matters is a thought leadership project of Now It Matters, a strategic services firm offering advising and guiding to nonprofit and social impact organizations.
If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, check out our playlists, and visit us at nowitmatters.com to learn more about us.